Climate literacy. Thanks, Gina. Climate Literacy Network, community call Tuesday. People coming in from all over, and I think if folks have announcements, we'll save them till the end or putting them in the chat, just because I know we have a lot to dig into with this awesome report. But why doesn't everyone go around and just introduce themselves, like your name, where are you coming in from? And because it is spring finally where I am, the thing you enjoy eating most in the spring, and maybe you eat it other times a year too, but in the spring. And I'll start. I'm Kristen Poppleton. I'm coming from St. Paul, Minnesota. I work with Climate Generation, and I had scrambled eggs with ramps, which is my favorite thing ever. Ramps, if you don't know, they're like early onions. And I think they maybe turn into leeks. I'm not really sure, but you can eat the whole thing from like the green end all the way to the white end, and they're delicious. And I will pass it to Ingrid.
Thanks, Ingrid Zabel. I'm with the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, New York. And I'm the climate change education manager there. So I work at informal education at a nature center and natural history museum. And I don't know, favorite thing to eat in spring. One of my grandmothers had this salad she called spring salad, which was Polish, Ukrainian origin. And I make that sometimes, it makes me think of her. And
if you want to,
I guess pass it to the next. How about Liza?
Everyone, my name is Liza Rodler. I am a research associate at FHI 360, which you'll be hearing about in a few short minutes. But I live in Durham, North Carolina. And here it already feels like summer. We're pushing 80s. So to me, spring food is often the best part of summer because it's not yet so horrific. So I think of fruit like strawberries. I just had the first really good strawberries of the season down here. And I will pass it to Eric.
Hi all, Eric Havel from Oakland, California, environmental education. I work with teachers and students at a lot of climate literacy building projects. I did Climate Gen's Institute last summer, it was great. I love spring greens. My wife's a TK, transitional kindergarten teacher, and we've been sort of shepherding her garden over the years, although there's a big transformation happening right now, but the greens that come out of that this time of year are really good. The fresh greens, kale, lettuce, things like that. I'll pass it over to Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. My name's Carolyn. I'm the Education and Curriculum Manager for the CLUE Institute, which is a climate education and advocacy nonprofit here in Florida. And, you know, Florida being very warm, this is kind of the beginning of our hot season. So we have our Blueberry Festival at one of the local farms is going to be this weekend. And they're offering, you know, sort of pick your own. So yeah, it's kind of the end of some of our more delicate fruit season. Karen, I don't think you've gone yet.
Hi, I'm Karen Holweg. I'm out here in Colorado, and I've been finding myself eating a lot more salads than I have for the winter, and it's nice to get off of soups. And I'm going to toss the ball to Rachel.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Renbarger. I'm located in Durham, North Carolina, and it is getting pretty warm. I'm very similar to most of y'all. My husband picked up strawberries from right down the road and made me homemade ice cream with it. And so I have been spoiled lately with, next is going to be blueberry and then it's peach. I've already got a lineup for him to do. Very excited about summer weather, spring weather, and the associated fruits. I'll pass it to Emily.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Snowd Brenneman. I work with the UCAR Center for Science Education in Boulder, Colorado. And as a program specialist, I do a lot of different things, do things with our websites, exhibits at the NCAR Mesa Lab. And thinking about my favorite food, it's funny, I think about this time of year and I just think about, especially in Colorado, it's patio weather. It's just starting to get, everyone wants to be outside. It doesn't matter what you're eating, as long as it's outside. With a glass of wine or your favorite microbrew. Yeah, that's spring to me.
Yay, spring. I think everyone went, right? Gina, did you go? Oh.
No, everyone probably knows me, but I will definitely share my favorite spring thing right now. We just went to the ice cream stand for the first time this weekend, and that's very much a summer item. So the fact that we were able to go in May was really fantastic. Also, I live in Vermont, and fiddleheads are a very big thing here. The ferns, like the baby ferns. So those are, I really like those too.
Yummy. Well, welcome to our guest speakers. They're coming to us from FHI 360, and I'm going to let them tell us more about that. They're both educational researchers, and I have had a ton of fun digging into this recent report that they put out, and I'm excited to hear from them a little bit more about it. I put a link to it in the chat. If you haven't downloaded it yet, you should. And I will pass it on to you.
Awesome.
Rachel.
Thanks for that intro. I'll go ahead and share my screen. We have some slides. All right, can everyone see that okay? Great. So as Kristen mentioned, Rachel and I are here to talk about a white paper that we wrote last year, or published this year, but did the bulk of the work last year, called Strengthening Climate Change Education in the US. And you've just heard who we are, but to tell you a little bit more, so at FHI 360, I'm a research associate. We work in mostly K-12 education in kind of a broad array of areas. This is specifically our first kind of foray into the field of climate change education, but our team has a lot of experience in STEM education more broadly, providing technical assistance and professional development to K-12 educators, and more recently kind of venturing into summer learning and family and community collaboration, with lots of other tinier projects thrown in. So we have a kind of diverse experience across our team, which includes a lot of practitioners and former practitioners. And I specifically am part of the research team. So that's kind of the angle we'll be bringing in today. And I'll also let Rachel reintroduce herself one more time.
Yes, I'm also a researcher on the research and evaluation team. I'm one of those former practitioners. I taught high school English. So again, not STEM, but very much in the public K-12 space, which we'll be focusing on today. And I did my PhD at Baylor University and focused on like systematic reviews and broad landscape analyses, that type of thing. So excited to be a part of this project specifically to dig into that aspect of climate change education.
Great, and I'll let Rachel kick us off.
So essentially, I know many of you are likely not interested in the weeds of landscape reviews and analyses. That is why I'm such a nerd. I love this stuff. And essentially, what we did was try to identify all of the things that have been published since 2015 about climate change education, focusing on K-12. We saw that there was a lot of higher ed, but we put that to the side for another group to analyze. We also saw that there was a lot of stuff in the global realm, a lot of things happening in Canada and Europe and all over the globe. But we focused specifically on the United States and public education generally. And we also wanted to make sure that what we found was empirical. So we didn't want opinion pieces. We didn't want fluff, really. We wanted to see what studies have been done, to see what has been done, where are the gaps, where should we go? And so to do that, we did, a broad search for these terms here. We weeded out all of those things that I already talked about. And what we came up with was over 2,000 things that we needed to sift through. And what we found was there were 175 either journal articles or white papers like this one, or reports from national organizations focusing on this that could really give us the information that we needed to figure out those 3 questions of what's being done, where we should go, and what research should be happening next. So once we found those 175, we did actually read them, skim them. We dug through them multiple times, and this was Liza and I, so you can imagine it took quite a while. But what we did, we analyzed them to try and figure out what the student-focused solutions were, the teacher-focused solutions, and the systems. So what are the districts doing, states, federal government, what are these systems that are happening to promote climate change education? So that analysis took quite a while. We put them into those buckets. But then once we looked at that, we also really wanted to find the answers to these 3 questions. So what do we need in terms of programs, interventions in those educational settings? Where should researchers go? We know that what we found, 175, is actually not too many things. Climate education research seems to be burgeoning in the past 30 years compared to some things that are a little bit older. So we wanted to help guide researchers to a more directed path. And then we also wanted to figure out what districts could do, policymakers could do to make sure that what works, this research foundation, goes in the right direction. We don't want people making policies that aren't informed by best practice. So thank you, Kristen, for already putting the white paper into the chat. As Liza mentioned, this was a organizational initiative. So FHI 360 is a much larger organization. It has a global reach. We have multiple offices all over the world. And every single one of those offices is now focusing on climate change. And we, as a part of the US education team, wanted to understand climate change education. Makes sense, right? And so we wanted to also include things that were pertinent to the work that we do in other ways. So FHI 360, while also caring about climate change, also cares about equity. And so we wanted to get some specific highlights around youth-led advocacy, so what students are doing to create the change, and then environmental justice. We know that marginalized populations based on race, class, sexuality, location, there are all these different groups who are affected more deeply by climate change. And so we wanted to understand what justice initiatives were in place to counteract that marginalization. And I do want to just pause for a second. We have 4 recommendations in this paper, and we're going to go through those, but please add to the chat, ask questions, come off mute. We would love to hear about what you're seeing, whether or not it's aligned with the recommendations. If it is similar, if you have hope out there in the world, would love to have those around the recommendations during this process. So feel free to jump in at any given point. We're not going to be talking too much about this today, so just want to give a brief shout out to those youth-led moments. So throughout the white paper, you'll see many of these boxes where you can feel really inspired, or at least I did, about different ways youth, students, including those in higher education and in the workforce, are making way for adults to do the work on climate change. They're amazing and they're doing the work. And so if you really want to see those are in boxes throughout the report. And we also want to frame the entire set of recommendations around that, so that we know that districts are not doing it for themselves, they're doing it for these climate activists, the next generations, the students who will be affected by climate when we're gone.
Great. So I'm going to kind of give a high-level overview of the 4 different recommendations that are included throughout the paper. If you have it open, you can kind of skim along and see that I'm pulling out little things here and there, but the paper obviously goes into a lot more detail. But to get started, the first kind of bucket of recommendations is really about policy level and kind of structural solutions, creating the conditions that educators need to teach climate change effectively. And we heard a lot of examples about how many different tiers of government, from federal to state to local to district, can all either kind of facilitate and support climate change education or create barriers when they're kind of not aligned. So there needs to be some really strong collaboration, kind of an alignment of policy from the national all the way down to the school level. And to dig into this one a little bit, so a key challenge in this area is that there's a lot of variation across states and even within states on climate change education policy. And with that variation, it becomes harder to kind of systemically track like what's working well and what's not. You might see there's like a map in that white paper, very similar to one of Katie Worth's graphics, talking about how different states have adopted, NGSS and other standards that kind of help get them in the right direction of working towards, making sure all districts are teaching climate change education, but not all states are on that bandwagon. And even within states, there might be some gaps in how that guidance actually translates into what's taught in classrooms. So in the face of this challenge of all this variation, there's definitely more opportunities for collaboration across states learning from one another about, how to go all the way from enacting new regulations and recommendations for how to teach climate change, and then making sure those trickle down into changing educators' practices. There's also some states that are not only making these recommendations, but actually offering funding to support those practices. It's not enough to say, okay, every teacher has to do X now, if those teachers don't, have the training or supports they need to follow those recommendations. So for example, Washington is highlighted in there as actually offering some funding to train teachers and train districts and how to follow the guidance they've offered. I should also say the little shout outs throughout this white paper are by no means exhaustive. We know we highlighted some really promising examples, and there are so many that we didn't have the space to highlight, but we'd love, in the chat or in any other forum, if you think of other, promising things that you want to highlight, we encourage it. And the last kind of promising development I want to highlight here is that, districts and schools have like that kind of level of power. It really varies between states. Some states give districts a lot of say over the curriculum they use and how they allocate their own funding, that sort of thing. And in other states, districts and schools have less kind of authority over how those decisions are made. So in cases when districts and schools can really take ownership over these decisions, there's some great examples of how they can do that with everything from choosing curricula to training teachers to, investing in infrastructure and transportation and all those things that align, maybe aren't climate change policy or climate change education, but align with best practices in sustainability. Moving to the next big bucket of recommendations, this one is all about high quality curricula and materials, which I think everyone in the CLEAN network should be really familiar with. That's how we came across the CLEAN network, was hearing from so many people who appreciated the focus on helping educators wade through so many things out there that are not high quality, which as educators know, having the time and support and resources to do that on your own is really daunting. But to dig in here, kind of in alignment with the CLEAN Network's mission, we know there's a lot of educators and districts that might be using low quality or kind of mediocre educational materials. And it's not for lack of best intentions, but just either from not being able to identify high quality materials, not having access to them, or having, just having to work with what they've got, which may not be the best. And so addressing this challenge has to come in a few different ways. In addition to folks at CLEAN kind of helping rate and understand how good different materials are and how they might align with different standards. Educators also need, more, there just needs to be more access to these materials. So ensuring that states and districts, when selecting curricula, are selecting things that include science based climate change education in them, and also come with strategies for teaching that climate change. So it's not enough, as we all know, to say, here's an activity on paper, but teachers need the support to know how to teach it, how to handle the questions that come up, and how to kind of empower youth to get through some of the, other stuff that comes with learning about climate change, the anxiety, the stress, the kind of situating this issue in the broader range of issues in society. And that kind of ties into the last one of thinking about interdisciplinary curricula. We know that climate change comes up in pretty much all subjects. And so supporting other educators for integrating climate change topics into their own subjects, even if they aren't traditionally science focused or STEM related. And that can also really create more on-ramps for students who might not think of themselves as, science kids, but realizing that climate change is applicable in so many ways to many different subjects. And so really leveraging opportunities to engage students in other ways. I want to pause here and just ask a few questions so folks can either come off mute if you want to answer them that way or toss them in the chat. But I'm wondering if any of these kind of findings or things surprise you thus far, or if they more align with what you might have thought going into a review like this.
I think from my perspective of doing a lot of similar work in California, all three resonate a lot. Just there's such a myriad of stuff out there. So like having ways to navigate, supporting teachers in navigating the landscape of things that are out there is really, really important, which kind of dovetails with the strategies idea, giving them time and space to really figure out how to use things that are out there and integrate it in, which, really all three tie together. They don't often have, with it sort of being emerging in California, pretty progressive, there's a lot going on, and yet a lot of this is happening at the district level. There's some big initiatives that a group called 10 Strands is leading that we're part of, my group's part of, developing a K-12 environmental justice centered curriculum that's also action oriented, 15 hours at each grade level. But the next step of that project is going to be for 10 Strands to sort of identify the funding needed to really do the professional development with the teachers, because that's the component that's, from a lot of the PDs that I've been involved in is really missing, or that teachers really cherish that time to dig in together, and not just about the facilitator giving all the advice, but it's really about co-strategizing in a group setting, how that's going to happen. So definitely, I think all three of those things are really important.
Awesome. Thanks. Carolyn?
Thanks. I will say that for sort of, interdisciplinary curricula, that's really big. One of the things that I've noticed, because one of my jobs here at Clio is to basically run teacher workshops on climate education. And there's often a hurdle where when teachers see the word climate in, the title, we call ours Climate Across the Curriculum to kind of emphasize that we touch on English language arts and social studies, as well as, in civics, as well as STEM. But we often find that if we're able to, talk and interact directly with teachers, especially of, humanities or, like elective classes, they're very interested once we explain. But there is absolutely a hurdle to getting them interested, and to not have them basically look at the word climate, go, oh, okay, for science teachers, not for me, and then not really engage. Like I said, once you can engage, they're often very receptive. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure, we're trying different strategies to get more folks involved, but that's definitely something I've noticed. I don't know if anyone has had particularly successful outreach strategies on that one.
So, thank you. That's really promising to hear. But yeah, Ingrid as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to pass on a story I heard from an elementary school teacher. It's not so much about lack of time to find materials, but lack of time to teach science, any kind of science, let alone climate science. They're so focused apparently at elementary grades on math, and ELA, especially post-pandemic. So she said the way she approached it was through interdisciplinary work. Basically, she would sneak science in through art projects. And she would work with an art teacher to do art projects where the topic was environmental science. I thought it was a really interesting, kind of sad that they find they don't have time to teach science, but a creative solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also really promising to hear. And granted, yeah, a little bleak when you think about having barriers to teaching science. But yeah, thinking about how, there's probably room for in a lot of subject areas to incorporate climate change, but it has to be a priority, and people have to know, like, either take that initiative to figure it out on their own and do that. And I also know, people are calling in from different states. Eric, you mentioned California being like progressive and kind of on board with this. Rachel and I are in North Carolina, so there's like some support, some hesitancies, and I know folks are from other places. So that was another, I would say, high level finding from this is that the political support, knowing some things have to kind of start pretty high up to make it all the way down, having that district level and even state level support for climate change is very helpful, and it can be much more challenging to get things moving when educators have to kind of fight against a tide of opinion.
And the place-based nature of all, like hearing this from all of you, that is one of those strategies for teaching climate change, is thinking about place and context in all of this. So y'all already brought that up, but that is part of what will work to change. So thinking about what natural disasters might be in an area and help supporting that development within the classroom. It's going to look different in California than it does in North Carolina, than it does in Oklahoma. And so thank you for like reminding us of how important that context is in doing this work. I think that's always nice to be reminded that there's no easy national solution to this.
But with that, I'm going to move us on to the next one, which some people already brought up, which is support for educators in doing this work. And so thinking, even if the policy support is there, even if they have high quality educational materials in their hands, there still needs to be some training and ongoing support to make everyone confident and knowledgeable about topics in climate change, especially given the, constantly evolving and updating science, and it will continue to do that over time. But in this realm, we have seen from survey data that most science teachers haven't really received a lot of formal training on how to teach climate change. And that's just in the field of science. So we know it's even less common for teachers in other subject areas. However, given how climate change, pops up in so many subjects, it's extremely critical for all educators to feel supported in this. Even if they're not, actively seeking it out, they still need to know what the science is, and also some strategies for supporting students as they grapple with implications for their future lives. We've seen in this area some, growing. I know the Clean Network supports all sorts of, summer workshops and things like that are doing great things, kind of often on smaller, medium scale for science educators. So I think there's a lot of promise in this area, things that could be scaled up for both pre-service educators and in-service teachers. And we also heard a lot about peer networks like this one and others to support ongoing learning. I love the listserv that we're all on of just people constantly sharing. There's so much to keep track of and so much to learn from. And those, I think, personally always have the added effect of keeping me hopeful and excited about this, which is really helpful when other things seem kind of bleak. But I'm going to move us along to our last one so we have more time to discuss at the end. In this fourth recommendation about out of school time and work-based learning models, I know we have at least one person who mentioned doing some informal and out of school time education. This is an area that FHI 360 has a lot of experience in, but there are also so many really interesting applications for climate change education, both thinking of, school-led and facilitated after school and summer programs, as well as more community-based, so either through museums or zoos or other kind of local nonprofit agencies, giving students opportunities to engage with climate topics outside of a formal setting can really improve students' confidence and enrich, their engagement. And then thinking in for older students, having more work-based opportunities can really expand not only from an equity standpoint of like giving access to income as they learn these things, but thinking about jobs and kind of continuing their learning after K through 12 in climate change. And a challenge here is that, not all students really vibe with some topics in school, or students face, other challenges, whether it be pandemic related learning or just kind of being in school generally. So just increasing the, in addition to strengthening in school climate change education, thinking of out of school opportunities can really increase access to these topics for all students, and make kind of engage community partners as well. So a question we've been pondering here, and I'd love any thoughts on, is how school districts can support out of school time learning and kind of facilitate it when it might mean bringing partners into their buildings or connecting students with community-based opportunities. But in addition to, offering students credit for apprenticeships or internships, we're really curious in what other ways are school districts supporting, like encouraging students to pursue out of school time learning especially in climate change, because we think this could really scale up a lot of really promising efforts, and like especially place-based models that are really kind of community specific. So yeah, if anyone has thoughts on that, would love to hear them. But more broadly, as Rachel mentioned, we did our big literature search we wrapped it up in like mid to late 2022. And so we're now almost halfway through this year. And so we're really curious if people have heard of other kind of new models, new programs, anything new that you're like, why wasn't this included like in this search that's come out maybe a little bit more recently?
Well, I have a few thoughts since no one's jumping in, and I see you, Eric, too. Can I go first, or do you?
Yeah, Kristen, go ahead.
Okay. So all of this really resonates with me, like the things that you found, and also like there's like a number. It's been super fun for dorks like me that like reports, but like there's been a lot of climate change education reports that came out in the last couple of months, and I'm seeing a lot of like congruence across like what people are saying and stuff. So I'll just share that the work that we do, we tend to frame either as climate change education with a foundation in justice or climate justice education. So the students, we have two programs at Climate Generation, one that supports a Teach Climate network of educators across North America, and then our youth program is more Minnesota based. And they've been stewarding a bill the last 3 years that they wrote, actually, high school students. That's a climate justice education bill. And so it's founded in that interdisciplinary focus. And that is one thing I find interesting, like listening the way you talk about this is I never anymore really talk about this as for science teachers ever. Like it's for any teachers. And the 300-ish teachers that attend our institute, I think I wanted to look back on like last year. We have like 100 people registered right now. And I think maybe like 60% or 70% are science teachers, but like they're social studies and arts and non-formal and actually in Minnesota, and I think this is showing up in other places too, our new social studies standards that just were written actually have climate change in them. And from my perspective, social studies is a far easier place to teach climate change than science anyways, because science is just so compartmentalized, like you can't be comprehensive in the way you're doing it. So those are just like some of the thoughts that I had, especially because I know you had said, you're also care about equity, and I wouldn't necessarily say also. I would say that, I mean, that's like equity and climate change education are one and the same. Like they are, climate change education is about how like marginalized communities are the first hit, first and worst, and also where solutions are right. I mean, that's just part of it. So, yeah, but thanks for this good work. Eric, what thoughts do you have?
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, similarly, I mean, even with California sort of having a lot of things going on, that science piece that you mentioned earlier about, Oakland, for example, the district representing here, the shirt, only gives like 45 minutes of science a week. And so I think kind of to Kristen's point, with the 10 Strands project, the idea is to center it not just on science, but on history and social science in particular. And as we develop the curriculum, finding the right home disciplines and really trying to, by design, make it interdisciplinary. And I think it kind of goes both ways. Like I would say the science actually is really important to center, because a lot of teachers are just trying to figure out like why this is important, but equally so to center it on, as you were sharing, Kristen, the marginalized communities and the fact that this is an all-in, we're all trying to kind of figure this out together. And those communities, many of them are first to be impacted and don't have the means to sort of navigate, the challenges. Kind of to your point about this recommendation, number 4, my whole background has been informal science education. So I worked at a science museum actually still there for about 25 years. And I think these institutions can serve as inspirations and catalysts for efforts where teachers don't have them. So I just finished up a PD project with some teachers. We meet once a month. And just for them to get together on a Saturday, we just ended a strike here in Oakland, but teachers still came out on Saturday, felt supported, felt like they could just share ideas with each other. So just that group learning, from a teacher standpoint, that an out of school organization like a science museum or even a history museum, right? Oakland History Museum or a zoo can really serve that. And students remember some of those experiences really vividly. Like I remember going to that science institution or that place and getting this great presentation and having this great experience, and it can catalyze their enthusiasm, right? So I think that's a really big role. And then I think district partnerships with out-of-school organizations is really key. So finding opportunities to write grants together, to sort of move forward with the work as a collaboration. And I think really poignant it to me right now is this idea of collaboration, that really working together towards solutions across disciplines, across types of organizations. There's efforts in the Bay Area that connect our city ECAP programs, energy and climate action plans, with district work. So, and that's where the career piece comes in, because the city's really energized around the idea of students choosing a gap year or choosing not to go to college. There's so many vocational opportunities for them to get into this space. Frank Nepal keeps talking about, we got to train a lot more electricians if we're going to, electrify the grid. So, those kind of things, we're looking at a career and internship fair here in the Bay Area, focused on green careers and internships in the fall, with that in mind. And it would be like a student-facing event, but also a teacher-facing event. So there'd be teacher learning opportunities, student learning opportunities, and ideally student engagement opportunities and internships that could take place during the year at organizations or summertime. So I think I really appreciate this recommendation, having lived it for my life, that, these organizations can be big players and big supports for the work.
Thank you for sharing. Those are so many exciting ideas. I can't wait to look up later. And Ingrid?
Yeah, I have a question. So I do a lot of climate change education in out of school time, like especially at a summer camp that we run. And I'd like to think that it's making a difference, and that, we're changing attitudes and changing behaviors of these kids. But a lot of the times we don't have formal evaluation, so I don't really know. And I'm curious about, in the literature review you did, were there studies that showed that, climate change education in summer camps and after school programs were effective and did change behaviors, or was this more of a recommendation of what we should be trying, but Because it seems like a good idea, but there's not really evidence yet. Like where does it fall? In the evidence?
I'm a little bit hesitant to say that we're like fully convinced there yet, because we only had a few that were really empirically and experimentally testing it. That's not to say that it likely doesn't work. I just don't say that the research is for sure there yet. But I would say that I feel confident in promoting that the research does support that.
Yeah,
But
I think
we
it's
should keep doing it.
Yeah, I know it's been a challenge in the field to have kind of the right assessment tools that can be used, across different curricula to compare them, because knowing how many things are place-based or kind of hyper-specific to topics, sometimes that can be hard to pick up in like very general, science test data, for example. Knowing climate change might be only a tiny portion of what everyone is tested on. And then in the informal space, knowing those programs look so different, I think it's a challenge for the field to develop better ways to even know kind of what to look for. So I know Rachel flagged in the chat a few kind of pages in the white paper where we try to talk about at least teaching strategies that are pretty well supported in the evidence. Things like promoting, hope and focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on challenges. That's like supported across studies. So I think having a good idea that a curriculum works might involve some, looking at those strands of like different types of strategies that seem to be effective and hoping that when you combine them, they're doing what they've done in other studies. But I think that's actually a great, moving to the next slide, areas in need of future study. I think more research is needed in this area and might kind of advance, some policy discussions if policymakers who are really looking for hard evidence to be like, see, like, this is going to do X, might help push them forward.
Are you familiar with the Sea Change report that came out?
Yes.
The first question you have, they really centered how youth were what made policy-led initiatives successful at state level for climate change education. So.
Yeah, we love that report. And I think all of these questions that we've highlighted here are kind of, we thought about them as an organization, but as well as kind of individual researchers, like what can we do with our kind of suite of expertise to help push things forward. And we know there's thankfully many other organizations and individuals in the space focusing on these same questions. And so I think a question of coordination is a good one. And I think the Clean Network is a great example of how that's being done. These like very frequent check-ins, sharing resources, because we don't want to duplicate, we want to amplify kind of good things that are happening. And so how do you do that, especially given everyone's in really different places and different stages of the journey? I think those are really interesting questions for us all to think about. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna kind of pause us here. We're happy to answer more questions. And thank you, Kristen, for putting the link in the chat, but we also encourage you to reach out to Rachel or I if you have any questions or want to talk further about this. We encourage you to share our paper with your friends, with your colleagues. That helps us, get our organization's name out there so we can try to make some friends in the space. And keep on working on it. But we really thank you for your time.
Thank you both. Is there any questions or ideas, next steps that anyone has? So we have a little bit of time.
A question I have. I love the points that were brought up about really approaching climate change education as just kind of a cross subject, like all ages, informal, or non-formal in school kind of need for focus. And I'm wondering if you all think like how you might go about providing professional developments and supports to like make all educators feel confident in teaching the subject. Like I know even if we're not thinking about climate change as a very science limited topic, I'm wondering if you think educators might want a little bit, some of the meat of like the science of climate change and that side, or if that's, limiting us more than we need to, and focusing on, the cultural implications and the history and the lived experiences of climate change could like not really require a very technical type of professional development.
I think it's interesting you asked that because this will be our 18th year of doing our Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, and teachers, when asked before an institute, often regularly say they want to learn more about the science of climate change. And that's definitely a part of our institute that you can do. I mean, it's pretty massive now. It's got like 80 sessions, and so it's like more like a conference, but they don't leave saying that's the part that was impactful. And I think the building of self-efficacy by being a part of a community and seeing that there are other teachers that want to do this and feel strongly about it, and hearing from speakers and having hands-on sessions is like the part that's actually what they need to boost them into like, I can do this. There's people out there that I can turn to. This is, that. And then of course the whole, the question you had about like what frameworks or policy, what's the barriers? I think fundamentally it comes down to like the administration of a school, those sorts of things. So and then working, we've become much more, the way we do our institute now is so different. It's not hours anymore. Almost everyone that's on this call is part of a group of 18 cohort organizations from across the country that spend 9 months planning the institute with us and are compensated for that time and bring that local context to it. And so providing that local level support, we've recognized is also like a really integral part of it, someone to connect back with, and also for us to know what is different and new at Clio in Florida and 10 strands in California, like the different circumstances. So I think that like there's just bringing that in, and we've developed curriculum now this year for the first time, actually through bringing in 4 elementary school teachers that co-developed it with a group so we could hear what elementary school, and it was very different than what we would have done. It was like, oh, that's what you want, okay, and like working with them also, so yeah. Sorry, Eric, I was rambling. I see your hand.
No, I wanted to give space for everybody too. Like I was picking up on what you were saying, but also Ingrid, what you shared about the science in the chat and the hands-on activities. I think getting folks into just understanding the phenomena, and couple things come to mind. One is during a successful period about 15 years ago when we were doing a climate change professional development that lasted for about 5 years, it was very much kind of picked up on what you said, Kristen, about train the trainer, bring teachers in. A subset of those will be really energized by it, have lots of experience to bring to the table. They become co-facilitators of the next cohorts. So, and then when you have district current teachers really helping to drive it, so they understand the landscape of their own district. And that when we got really good at that project, I felt like we were really aware of the FOSS curriculum, for example, that Oakland had adopted, and where we could scaffold on the climate content that wasn't there. So that was, really great effort to sort of really understand what each district is working with and where to start. And that kind of also centering the teachers' needs. So the workshop that I just finished up on Saturday, it's a very interdisciplinary group of teachers, especially from one middle school. So we've got folks working with special needs students. We have some history and ELA teachers. We have some science teachers. There's a teacher that's going to be moving from math to science. So math integration. So that group, because they're all from the same school and they're all excited about bringing in environmental education, have them working together to create the strategies. One of the exercises we did with them over the last couple of workshops was, what would your ideal field trip to the Science Center look like? What components would it include? You've got special needs students, so we want the hands-on piece. Maybe the dwell time is a little bit shorter. You want the math integration. You want the language arts to be sort of uplifted. So it's really powerful to have an interdisciplinary team, right, together to co-create. And again, centering the needs of the teacher from the get-go, finding out where they are, what they want. And ideally, if they having a partner, having a thought partner, if you work with teachers in schools, having at least two can really be nice, because you don't feel like you're alone. You feel like you're doing this together. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for such thoughtful answers to my very big and daunting question.
One more thing I would say is I think NGSS, I know that a lot of states haven't adopted it, but what I really like about it is it's a way of thinking. It encourages a way of thinking that transcends just science, right? It's about critical thinking, problem solving, engineering design cycle, iterating things, iterating ideas, and that can really map over to social science really well in terms of critical thinking as well. So that's what I really appreciate about that. And I know it's challenging for some states to even think about adopting that, and Carolyn, we've had great conversations, on clean about the difference between Florida and California. And it's just, how do we support this broader idea that we just want critical thinkers, in all disciplines. And we want to encourage that critical kind of standpoint. And then how do we critically think about solving this problem from an interdisciplinary vantage point, right? So I really like that about NGSS, but I recognize it's challenging to just sell it at certain state levels.
Any other thoughts before we bid adieu to our group? Well, this has been awesome, and I know there will be a ton of people that access the recording. That's what's so great about Clean, is you can go back and listen to things that you can hear. But thanks, everyone. I hope you have an excellent. I hope everyone gets to enjoy their favorite spring foods sometime today and this week. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liza and Rachel. Thanks, Kristen.
Have a
Thank
nice week.
you. Bye.
Bye.